My name is Bahman Yazdanfar, and this is Voters Echo, a weekly program to produce different ideas, different visions, different perspectives of different candidates, different individuals to you, Torontonian, Ontarian, and Canadian, especially in the years that we have election like this year. A couple of the disclaimer: I am not paid by any individual, any corporation, any political party, any entity, any union. This program is done on my own. The airtime for this program has been donated by Dr. James Sears out of his credit with that channel studio. And I do not endorse any candidates or their affiliated parties. I am here just talk to them, and they have the opportunity to talk to you, their constituents, to explain what they are about and what they do for you, and you have to make that decision on your own. And since I am doing it alone, if you find it on your heart that you can help me either in the human resource capacity or monetary, there is a button on our website, www.votersecho.com. You can go there and drop me a line or two. I will be more than happy to talk to you or communicate with you. So without any further ado, let's start with our guest today, John McKay. I don't want to introduce himself. I want him to introduce himself to you and tell us about your background, because it is so so vast. I cannot even put it in one sentence or two.
Well, I'll try to get it down to two sentences. Anyways, yes, I'm John McKay. I'm the Member of Parliament for Scarborough Guildwood. I've been there for 18 years. Prior to that, I was a lawyer, and prior to that, I was in school. I was at Queen's and U of T, et cetera, et cetera. I'm married, 5 kids, 3 grandkids.
Good for you.
And in fact, I'm so enjoying being a grandparent that had I known that it was going to be so much fun, I think I would have skipped the interim stage of being a parent. Apparently, that's a conditioned precedent.
Yeah. You want to escape the hard part.
That's right.
Just get the fun time.
Just go to the fun part. Yeah.
Is politics, is that as fun as your family?
No, I wouldn't say that. There are days that it's pretty good, and there are days that it's maybe not quite so good. As I tell others, I've completed an entire circuit of the House of Commons. I started out as a backbencher in the Chrétien government, got into the government.
Which year was the first year?
97. Then Martin brought us into Privy Council positions, so we were part of the government in the Martin government. Then, of course, we lost in 2006, so we were part of the official opposition. We lost again in 2008, still official opposition, and then 2011 was a bit of a disaster, and ended up as third party. So I've gone completely right around the entire circle.
Coming back.
Yeah.
Let's get a little bit. As you know, this program is uncensored, unscripted. I don't prepare questions. Since you brought the issue of the going around the circle. How, as an MP, as a human being who has been there for, let's say, about 18 years or so, and going from the being in top
to the bottom,
bottom, so to speak. It's not the bottom. It's just don't get much of a recognition. It's still the same salary, the same parliament, the same. But how does it affect a person? I mean,
I wish you would script your questions. That's a very difficult question.
Okay. Let me put it this way. From the time that Mr. Paul Martin lost the election to Mr. Harper in 2006, and I believe it was 23rd of January 2006.
Yep.
The reason I remember because it was my birthday.
Oh.
so
somebody was celebrating.
Well, I was not actually. But it was very cold, if you remember. But what I'm saying, what goes through the psyche of a person like yourself?
That's an interesting question, because I was actually angry, and I was angry for a longer period of time than I probably should have been, because we in the Chrétien Martin era had worked very hard to get the nation's finances back in order. And you'll recollect in '93, according to the New York Times, we were going to be an honorary member of the third world because our finances were, how should we say, Greek-ish.
It was after the NAFTA and after the free trade and the introduction of the GST.
Those are all significant events,
Yeah.
but it all hinges on the fiscal framework, and if you don't keep your fiscal framework in some relative state of balance, then the whole thing just goes down the toilet. So we could have, we didn't, of course. We could have ended up like Greece or Portugal or Ireland or Spain, in some real financial difficulties where our GDP would be exceeded by our debt. Anyways, Martin and Chrétien worked very hard, and I like to think that I and other members of the caucus contributed quite substantially to getting us back on order. And so we ran 10 years of budgetary balance. We handed off to Mr. Harper a $13 billion surplus, and in 2 years he was into deficit, and then he was into massive deficits. So at this point, Mr. Harper's run up something in the order of $150 billion in additional debt after receiving this. So it actually, because I'd worked in finance.
But in 2006, you didn't know if it is the direction that goes. Why you were angry?
Well, no, we did know that because in finance they call it the fiscal framework.
Okay.
And the fiscal framework is these are your revenues, these are your expenses. You got to keep
It's
them
like
in rough
budgeting.
Well, it's not. I mean, at one level, it's these are huge numbers. At another level, it's not greatly different than your household budget. You can't continue to spend more. So if you voluntarily trash your revenues, i.e., in the household terms, I think I'll start working 4 days a week instead of working 5 days a week. Well, your salaries, your revenues are going to go down by 20%.
Of course.
Well, that's essentially what Mr. Harper did when he trashed the HST. He took about $14 billion a year out of the revenue stream, plus he had a whole bunch of other tax cuts. Now, if he'd offset that with some cuts to his expenditures, fine. Those would be decisions that he made. But he didn't do that. All he did was run up the credit card. So the credit card's now up $150 billion. And a good portion of it, I would say maybe in the order of 60%, has to do with all of these tax cuts that Mr. Harper loves to brag about. The 2008, 2009, 2010 recession, any government would have spent money, and I don't fault him for that, but I do fault him for running up the national debt by $160 billion.
Let me put it in a form. It's not really. It probably is not a exact comparison, but let me put it in a comparison with the province of Ontario.
Yeah.
During the same years, province of Ontario even accumulated over $160 billion of the debt, even though they were not the same. They did not have the same policy as the federal counterpart because they were liberals. How you explain that from you? I mean, I know you are not in the province, but
yeah, I have to put out the disclaimer that I'm federal liberal, not provincial liberal.
No, I understand. But from
Yeah.
perspective of someone who, if you say just conservative, did that by cutting the tax.
Yeah.
These people in Ontario, liberals in Ontario, did not cut the tax. In fact, they added a large amount of the.
Ontario has been particularly affected by the destabilization of the fiscal arrangements. So Ontario lost something like 20,000 manufacturing companies, which
during this last
number of years. So every one of those companies pays taxes, and of course every one of them has employees of one kind or another. So they had a major meltdown in their fiscal their income that they were generating. Second thing that happened was that a lot of a lot of companies moved west into Calgary and Edmonton. Third thing that happened was that the Canadian dollar escalated dramatically, affecting Ontario probably the most.
Because of the export issue.
because of the export issue. You look at the number of motor vehicles we were exporting prior to 2008, and look at it now. Those are a lot of jobs that have gone somewhere else other than Ontario.
And what it contribute to? Why we lost that kind of number?
A couple of reasons. One of which is the dollar. Productivity is another reason.
What do you mean by
productivity? For whatever reason, Canadian companies are not leading edge in terms of their productivity.
You mean in comparison by
Chinese
manufacturer and the cheaper labor and stuff.
Now that's not entirely true with respect to automobiles. Automobiles, it is a productive industry here, but other companies have not kept up, and so we as a society, we as an Ontario society, have been affected the most by failure to keep up in productivity. And economists lament this endlessly, that Canadian manufacturers are not as competitive as they should be. So,
because we have the largest in population.
So I have some sympathy actually for the premiers of Ontario, whether it's.
So in the case of Ontario, you believe that it was not the issue of the tax issue.
I don't. Yeah.
It was the manufacturing.
These weren't policy fiscal decisions taken by the government of the day.
So going back again, go back to the issue of the federal. So in 2006, you feel angry that everything doesn't go. It comes to 2008, they don't get the vote of confidence. You guys go to election. What's happened? In that time, I believe you had Dion.
We had Dion, and Dion.
Dion is a very good policy man.
Yes.
I don't know about the
and one very decent human being. And if you ever give the opportunity to invite him on your show,
I'd love to.
He's a really, really decent human being, and thinks deeply, and I guess the consensus is he wasn't able to communicate his green shift idea, which was to essentially move tax onto carbon products and away from income tax and corporate tax. So corporate tax, income tax down, carbon tax up, and so you will be shifting tax. Essentially what British Columbia has done.
Okay.
British Columbia has the lowest corporate and personal taxes in Canada, and yet they tax things like gasoline and heating and all that sort of stuff, anything that produces carbon, at a much higher rate than does anybody else.
Do you agree with that kind of?
That's the way you got to go. You got to. If you're going to do anything about climate change, which is of course the reason that you actually do these things, if you're actually going to be serious about it, you've got to put in price incentives for people to change their behavior and price disincentives for people to change their behavior. Doesn't
this have a kind of the fire back to the personal lifestyles of the citizens?
Of course, but we got to change our lifestyles. We can't carry on doing what we're doing. I mean, 97% of the scientists can't be wrong.
No, I don't have problem. I'm not disputing the issue of the scientists. I'm not scientist. I cannot say whether or not they are correct or not. But there is something that has been on the table for last few decades, and I know that. What I'm asking is, have a trouble understanding in general is how taxing the carbon can help the climate, because it is like a gambling on the behavior of the people to react toward that higher increase in the heating system or in the gasoline consumption, and so that is a kind of gambling.
I'll give you a simple analogy: cigarettes.
Okay.
You up tax on cigarettes, you reduce consumption, particularly among young people. Older people, not so much. But tax and cost drives behavior. Similarly, you up tax on motor vehicles, for a gasoline, people will move to smaller cars. So in Canada, we have a much smaller car fleet than does the United States. The United States, that's where you buy your gasoline. It's cheap. Up here, it's far more expensive, and it's
In
almost
Europe, it's even more expensive.
and
than
Europe
here.
it's even more expensive again. And look at the size of the fleet. The cars by and large are much smaller in Europe than they are in Canada, and in Canada by and large they're smaller here than they are in the United States. Why? Just the cost of gasoline.
So there is a fundamental belief or liberal belief in the Liberal Party is that by taxing the carbon. By the way, are you talking about the carbon trade or are you talking about the carbon tax?
Well, you can do several different ways. There's basically 4 ways you can do.
What are those?
There's cap and trade. There is intensity based. There is a carbon tax, and there's fee and dividend.
Can you explain just one
Cap and trade is what Quebec is doing and Ontario is about to do, and that is you take an industry, you say this is the amount of carbon that you may emit, and how you get to that level is your problem. So you can either do one of two things. You can improve your technology
to reduce
carbon,
yes,
reduce your emissions, or you can buy carbon credits with other industries that maybe do things more efficiently and therefore
they sell?
There's a whole market.
So they get their money back.
Yeah.
So that is this carbon trade is only focused on the manufacturing aspect or the people who.
Like the cement industry is a classic example.
Or coal industry. Or whatever.
Yeah.
And what is the second one?
So the second one is pure tax, like BC.
Okay.
And BC just simply they tax carbon.
Gas.
Yep.
And what is called?
It's just tax.
Tax.
It's just tax.
Oh, carbon tax.
Yeah. The third way is intensity based. So that's what Alberta does, and Alberta tries to get the oil industry, in particular, to keep their emissions down, and they charge the oil industry a fee for doing that, and they accumulate this in a big fund in order to develop research on how to get emissions down. So it's about $2 billion a year that
who pays that money?
The industry itself,
the oil industry.
The oil industry in particular. So that's the third way.
Okay.
And then the Green Party advocates fee and dividend, and so it's kind of like the first part is kind of like a tax, just like a tax on carbon, just like the other. But at the end of the year, you receive a dividend check based upon your, I'm not quite sure, based upon your size of your family or something of that nature.
So
those are the 4 main ways.
So out of these 4, how much of the cost of the administrative goes to provide each one of those, or if you have?
Well, the attraction of the BC tax approach is that there's virtually no administration at all. I mean, it's you're at the pump, you pay the tax, you pay for your gas, pay the tax, boom, it's in the bank, and then they use those revenues to reduce income and corporate taxes. The cap and trade is a bit more administratively intensive, shall we say, because you have to negotiate with each industry sector and then with each corporation within that sector.
Supervise it and policy it and measure it.
And all that sort of palaver. The fee and dividend, in theory, should be relatively simple.
But still you need an organization.
But nobody's adopted that. I think it's kind of interesting. It is the position of the Green Party, but no province in Canada has adopted that. And then the intensity tax, the taxing is easy. It is what's to do with the money, where you will pursue technologies that drive the emissions down, and that gets to be a bit tricky at times.
It's like that adding a few years back, adding extra cent or two on the liter of the gasoline, and they said it's for road, but nobody knows what's happened to it.
Yeah. All governments say that. Although actually in that one, that was Martin, and Martin in 2004 or 5 allocated 2 cents out of the federal tax on gasoline to municipalities based on a per capita distribution. So in Toronto here, I think
because I
they receive a significant sum of money anyway.
But I had guests last year in my last year show prior to the municipal election called Independent Nation at that time, and I had one of the members of the provincial Liberal member of the actually Sue Wong, probably you know her. And she was talking about the delay on the transfer of the money from the Ottawa to the
That's another issue.
So the question is, if those such a carbon related allocation goes to one pot, and the person or the gatekeeper delays the transfer, how it impacts the business of the different governments?
Good question. I think what she was talking about was something
it
related.
was about health. It was regarding
and
to health.
Ontario was getting their money slow.
Yes.
And in Ontario, particularly Charles Sousa, was upset that the money wasn't flowing. So it's a different issue.
Yeah.
In terms of British Columbia's tax, it happens within the fiscal year. So, in fact, they've got an interesting section in their legislation which
you
says...
mean provincially?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which says it just stays provincial. There's no transfer between levels of
that
government.
I'm trying to
and
say.
that would be the same with cap and trade for Ontario and Quebec. And again, that's a distinction between us as the Liberals and the NDP. The NDP wants to have a national cap and trade program, which has an appearance of being attractive. But
again, there's lots of negotiation. You have to.
Yeah, you got. Like what they're going to say to Premier Clark? Oh well, you got to throw away your gas tax and do us. And you're going to have to tell Rachel Notley in Alberta you can't do what you're doing.
And plus, if there is different parties in the power, that could.
And Ontario and Quebec's already doing it. So what are you going to have to do? Throw them out too? It's.
So what is from perspective of the policy? Let me again become a little bit of the playing devil advocate. When we are talking about conservatives, first of all, I always said in my show publicly, I don't believe that the present conservative government is the conservative of the Johnny MacDonald or Red Tories or this kind of thing.
Joe Clark.
Or Joe
Clark. Brian Mulroney's a little jumpy.
Well, yes, Brian Mulroney was started a little bit going toward this slippery slope. However, but when we talk about the left or center left, I am just putting it very carefully in quotation because now is really lines are blurry these days. What is the fundamental difference between Liberals and NDP when it comes to governing?
Well, let me just go back to the environment thing.
Yeah.
Our approach on the environment is basically consensus building with all of the provinces, and what we're saying to the provinces is, look, these are your targets. How you get there is your business. So kind of like a Medicare approach to.
So it is your objective. We check at the end of the year if you passed like a grade kind of thing.
Well, it's a little simple, but. Every province is uniquely resourced,
of course,
and has unique challenges, and so so this whole one size fits all approach is a little how should we say
in Canada is naive to assume that you can.
We're talking about the second biggest country in the world with 4 time zones.
And we have a lot of the power of the provinces is even more than federal in many cases.
In many instances, yeah. So, if you will, in some respects, it's a classic illustration of how the Liberals would do something as opposed to the way the NDP would do something.
How about the other issues outside of because environment is just one issue, but how about the let's say, national housing or domestic law and order, or even foreign policy? How differ? Because
well, let me take foreign policy. So we have we are the party of Mike Pearson, if you will, and we are the party that engages with partners literally around the world, even the ones that don't like us. So our first point of our foreign policy would be to re-engage with the United Nations. There's a prize if you can name our ambassador to the United Nations.
We don't have any because
well, I don't know whether we do or we don't.
No, apparently we were kicked out.
Well, we didn't get into
from the Security
Council, exactly. Where before we had very high-profile people. That was sort of the coveted ambassadorship was to be the United Nations because Canada was a player. So I think that'd be point one. Of an approach that we would take. Point two would be that we would very carefully scrutinize military engagement. So we said no to Iraq. We said okay to Afghanistan. We are saying that we're a little dubious about the current
issue of the Syria and
ISIS.
Yeah.
We said yes to Libya. Between us and the NDP, they just simply say no to everything. And that's kind of like
but NDP has never been
I know. They've never actually had to make the choice, but that's their position. They were no on Libya, no on Iraq, no on Afghanistan, no on ISIS. And so there are points where you do engage.
Before the show starts, we had a very small chat about the demography in your writing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it is practically has a couple dozen of different nations are living in.
If it was only a couple dozen.
Well, I'm talking about the large numbers,
yeah.
the communities of the. Now, you do campaign, don't you?
Oh yes.
Okay.
See, these knuckles are a little.
I used to.
You're smarter than me.
What? No, I learned my lesson after peeling off the screen. But what do you get out of people, out of those either immigrant or citizens who were born outside of country? Who do not have complete exposure to the system of the governing here. So when you go to their door, and if the door opens and a Syrian answer the door, or a Bangladeshi answer the door, and then they say, well, you are a white guy, and what you know about my country, still because they carry, many of them, they still carry that urge of the childhood patriotism.
Well, the first thing that's amusing to me is that I don't have an entourage. For a lot of my people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, I don't have 15 people, accompanying me everywhere, opening the door, driving me here, getting me a Timmy's coffee, or they find that.
Well, you don't have volunteers?
No. I drive my own car, and I go and talk to people, and they're kind of stunned that I show up. Second thing is that you have to know something about a lot of countries. And I actually kind of enjoy that part. So, I got to know a lot about Sri Lanka.
I just used that as an example.
No, but I'm using it as an example of the obligations on me. Funny story, I had some people in from Syria, and they were Druze. And they were stunned that I knew what Druze were and where they're located, in the mountains of Lebanon and things of that nature. And they have a center on Markham Road, just south of the hydro wires.
Okay.
So they were in to see me about, and I can't remember what it was, but it probably had something to do with the.
What is the dialogue? What do they ask?
Well,
What is their concern? What is this?
the first level of dialogue has to do with generally immigration, their
Okay.
personal immigration or visa or whatever. Second level of dialogue has to do with citizenship and the delays and the I should say the processing times. The third has to do with disasters. So if you have a tsunami, it's usually affecting somebody. Currently, it's a Dominica. There was a hurricane in Dominica, and so we've got some concerns. Some people concerned about that little island in the Caribbean. Fourth has to do with how we approach conflict, so
And your answer to all
well,
of
there
this?
is the answer is there's no quick and easy answer.
That is what that I was told.
Yeah,
because
like anybody who thinks that they know what they're talking about generally doesn't. So in the case of Sri Lanka, you've got a conflict between Tamil and Sinhala, with Christians and Muslims kind of on the margins, and of course there was a kind of a cleansing that was going on back in 2008 or 2009, 2010, and that the conflict as a conflict has settled down, but the justice issue still remains outstanding. So that was an issue that occupied us for a while.
Why was Canada engaged in that?
No, but
so
but
really, what you cannot do much.
There's not
about.
much we can do, although there is demands on us to do things. I actually thought that all the political parties, including Mr. Harper, approached the Commonwealth meetings appropriately. And that was, why would we be having a meeting of the Commonwealth countries in Sri Lanka without actually Sri Lanka dealing justly and fairly with their minority populations?
And why did we have?
And why?
Why do we have that?
Well, that was the decision, and we boycotted it. And I
You
frankly,
mean
we mean the Guinean government.
Oh,
We
okay.
boycotted it.
Okay.
I actually thought that was the right decision on the part of the Prime Minister, and I think it largely came from the Tamil community communicating their concerns to us, and even the opposition parties communicating that concern to the Prime Minister. So
I'm glad. Just I want to say the good segue, because you brought the issue of the immigration and the refugees and the immigrants and so on. The concern in last week or so, because of the picture, and I want to, before I ask the question, I just want to say that what I think in generally, I don't believe that any picture should really stir that kind of the commotion, because philosophically and historically speaking, in last 3,000 or 4,000 years that we have documented to some extent, always people moving from one end of the earth to another. Always this thing has happened. It's nothing new, but my question comes, that is where I stand personally, but my question is, why politicians, especially the leaders of the parties, use this kind of the images as an excuse or as an issue to try to tell to the audience that we are better than the others? And I'm not talking about just liberal. I'm talking about liberals, NDP, and conservative, which they try to get the other side.
yeah.
How do you think? Because you are in the government for 18 years, so you tell me what is inside. Give me inside the scoop kind of this.
Well, it's interesting what moves people, and that picture moved people. And politicians, for better or for worse, are in the business of persuasion.
Do you agree with that kind of the approach?
I don't think it matters whether I agree or whether I disagree.
It's just
All I
happens.
know, all I know is that you had to be an absolute stone not to be moved by that picture, and why.
Oh, I don't have problem with them moving. I was moved with seeing 3 years old lying down. Whether or not the picture is true, that we don't know that.
Then you
But
look at it from my standpoint, because then
you have grandchildren too.
But no, but on a political standpoint. So So then the letters and the emails and the phone calls and the personal conversations start to happen, and it becomes, well, what are you, politician, what are you going to do about it? And that's when the pressure ramps up on the leadership in particular, but MPs. I mean, I heard it at the door. I've got emails to that effect. What are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And I thought actually Mr. Trudeau was pretty good when he said that, we're not the nation we think we are. We think of ourselves as a warm, generous, open, caring, refugee-receiving nation.
Really?
Yeah, that's the way we think of ourselves. And we haven't been that way for at least the last 10 years.
I believe it's more than
well, if you knock on my doors, the hero of refugee and immigration is Pierre Trudeau.
Pierre Trudeau at that time was because of the.
And I actually,
it was different era. Canada was much a smaller country in the population.
And actually, to be fair, I thought Mulroney was more sympathetic, particularly on the apartheid issue, was more sympathetic. But I'd say after that, we've been a little bit, I think,
jaded,
a little bit more tight about these policies than we think we are. We still see ourselves as. Well, I mean, a lot of Canadians still see ourselves as blue beret peacekeepers, when in fact we are nowhere as close to what we used to do.
No, we are becoming part.
So, all of which, you asked me the question, well, why do politicians use these things? Well, actually, politicians don't use these things. No, that's not correct. Politicians are forced to respond to demands of constituents. So, you can take Mr. Harper's position was, initially a bit of sympathy, and turn it on to, well, I think we're doing the right thing because we're involved militarily with ISIS. Or you can do what Mr. Trudeau did was, look, we are nowhere near what we think we are. We're nowhere near the capacity that we have, and called for a quota of 25,000 immediately, called for $100 million to go to UNHCR, United Nations Human Refugee Commission, and another $100 million to deal with the resettlement. Not all refugees are created equal. They don't all walk in with the perfect resumes, and some people in those pools of refugees are not necessarily citizens that you would invite into the country. So you do need to process, and you do need to be careful, and you do need to do it quickly, but you do need to do it quickly. And
so do you believe, or do you personally, I'm not saying the position of the Liberal Party, but personally, do you believe that by changing some of the regulations of the immigration or acceptance of the new immigrants here, do we really can make it help to this crisis?
Will make a difference between refugees and immigrants.
Refugees.
In refugees, that system is severely underfunded. I don't think you actually need to change the definition.
Because a few years ago, if you remember those Somali ships that from, I think it was from Bangladesh, a couple of the ships there were coming to the Tamils,
yeah.
They were coming toward the border of the British Columbia, and then they were scrutinized, and there was a lot of hype about that time.
Yeah.
But what's happened out of that fiasco, or not fiasco, out of that episode? Did anything good came out of it from a perspective of the policy?
I think the vast majority of the Tamil migrants were accepted as refugees. Some were not, and it's like you have a pool of 100 people, and 98 are probably perfectly legitimate refugees.
And a couple, you always have a couple of bad apples.
Exactly, but you have to process the whole lot. And that requires resources, and we have severely under-resourced the processing of Syrian and Iraqi refugees. And so people are languishing in these camps. And then when the fighting gets close to them, they've got absolutely nowhere to go. So they take these high-risk journeys across the Mediterranean Sea. And that's why we see the pictures we see.
Someone was talking to me, or we were discussing a week ago, West in general, especially United States and NATO, they get involved with these groups like ISIS or Al Qaeda or any conflict that involve these groups of the so-called terrorists in one area, and then they allocate immediately billions of dollars for the military, like air. How come for that kind of the decisions, governments are very snappy, but when it comes to the consequence, or at least take responsibility partly, not all, about the consequences of their own action, how come they are not? They are slow to respond?
Oh, that's a nasty question.
Is it?
And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And I'd actually point to we as human beings have many good impulses, but we also have incredible destructive impulses as well. And so governments, in fact, reflect their electorate. In some respects, the military solution is kind of like the attractive one. Like send over some well-trained pilots and their airplanes.
Like Hollywood kind of thing.
Exactly. We have images and big ships and big guns and all the rest of the stuff. I mean, it's kind of, particularly America riding to the rescue, the sheriff of the world, et cetera, et cetera. The trouble with going into a place like Syria in particular is that there are no white hats, there's no good guys.
And it's not one point to another point, it's in the middle of the desert and all is spread. And all people are spread. You can recognize who is
You don't know who's who.
Oh, yes.
You don't know who's who. The ISIS guys are bad. Assad people are bad. The whole lot of them are just really bad news for everyone. And you overlay that with this massive fight between the Sunnis and the Shias for domination in the kind of the region.
Which has been there for the last 1,400 years.
Exactly. We'll go back to Ali. Yes, Muhammad and Ali. So
he's actually Ali and Omar kind of thing.
Yeah, and so you get some guy in the Pentagon saying, "Oh, well, we can solve this with a bunch of bombs." Well, that's nonsense. That's just nonsense.
Then what is it? Is it the attraction of just the military complex, or just attributing or allocating some sort of the money to a funnel that is more profitable, or more cronyism, so to speak, the governing government? I'm not saying specifically a party. I'm talking about the governing governments.
That's an attractive theory, and it is in some respects. There's truth in it. There's no question, but the military-industrial complex is a highly profitable, some might quite argue, corrupt agency of the government. My numbers,
you remember?
$600 billion budget for the U.S. military. Just to give you some perspective of that, that is 2 times what our entire Canadian budget is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
it is all of our debt, by the way.
And that's U.S. dollars versus Canadian dollars. It is 1 year,
and it is all of our debt.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So you get some scale of the involvement of every congressional district, every senatorial district, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of jobs, and therefore the pressure upon the politicians to maintain and develop and grow the military-industrial complex versus the aid budget. And the aid budget, the humanitarian relief budget, is minuscule, relatively speaking. In our case,
we used to be green. The reason I brought this issue because you say we used to be green beret, we used to blue beret, we used to be peacekeeping kind of situation. But Canada does not have that kind of the hefty budget.
No, we have our military budget's about 18 billion, and our our aid budget is 3 billion,
which is very
6 times. Okay, so I don't know whether the scale is the same in the U.S. My guess is that it's not, but
no,
it just gives you some idea.
The reason I brought the U.S. not necessarily because the U.S. is completely different beast when it comes to the politics and how they. But
the demands on politicians are similar. Aid is diffuse. Aid doesn't have clear results. Aid means lots of refugees and camps, and they go on for years and years and years with, only unhappy
It doesn't
results.
have the bang that you want to see.
But but if I fly an airplane over and I drop a bomb on somebody, there's a result.
And the destructive result.
Exactly. It's not a happy result, but it's a result.
Just before I end this just line, just recently, Mr. Harper a few months ago refused to disclose the budget that they allocated for the extension of the mission toward it. Why is that? Don't we have a system in place that these things has to be disclosed or not? When it comes to the money,
you're hitting on one of what I think is Mr. Harper's most despicable characteristics, and that is information is power. And he retains all the information, and therefore he has all the power. Parliament, which is people like me, get to see less and less. So he has systematically taken all of the powers of Parliament and allocated them to his own office. So, for instance, the parliamentary budget officer, who is more accurate, inevitably more accurate than the Department of Finance and Mr. Harper's projections, has to literally sue the government to get access to the books of government. So
and we know the judicial system.
And you know what happened with his attack on the Supreme Court. But on your point of not knowing what the ISIS mission is costing, we're in guessing mode. We're pinning the tail on the donkey, and Mr. Harper likes it that way, because then he doesn't have to answer pesky questions from parliamentarians, journalists, and others.
But is it his right? Does he have this kind of entitlement to do that?
Does he have the entitlement to do it?
Yeah.
He has the entitlement as long as he's got a majority government and they're protecting him from any
so if he was in the minority government like a previous session, he wouldn't be able to do that.
Well, even there you have difficulties, because if you are bringing, you say, I want this disclosed, and you bring a motion to that effect, and the government says, well, this is a confidence motion, you're playing with big consequences. So we did that. We did that in 2011. We called their bluff on a confidence motion. The government fell, and we ended up in an election, and that was not a happy circumstance. So
that is actually I brought it up with a member of the provincial parliament a few weeks back here, because the same thing happened in Ontario in 2014, because NDP did not follow the rules of the parliamentary to just go and put that the confidence issue, which was in that case budget, to the vote, and they decided to settle it in the front of the press. Mm-hmm. We went to a premature election, which we're supposed to have it this year instead of last year, and we ended up with the majority. I know you're liberal and you're happy with the result, but in the same it is very similar scenario with 2011, isn't it?
There's some parallels. There's no question. When you force a government to a confidence, and the government treats it as a confidence motion, and the consequence is the dissolution of Parliament, you got an election, and how elections turn out, it's a bit of a crapshoot.
Have you ever had a cabinet position in general?
I was a member of the Privy Council, but I was Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Finance.
So you have more information about finance than
that's the reason I can talk with some confidence, because I've actually sat at the Department of Finance table and looked at the books.
And it was at the time of the Mr. Martin, I believe.
Mr. Martin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a challenging question?
I thought you already asked me a bunch of challenging questions.
No, it was just, I am just curious.
Yeah.
You mentioned in 1993 when Liberals took power, and it was practically demise of the Conservative or Conservative in the parliamentary numbers, two or three. You were in a bad shape financially, and then you brought it back. But it coincides with the time, I believe, Mr. Clinton was elected in the United States at the same time.
He was 92.
92, yeah. And I remember in 94, or around 94 or 95, double book entry came to the effect in south of the border, south of 49 in the United States.
Double book. What's double book?
Double book entry, kind of. And it was changing the accounting system. Instead of putting everything to the loss, put a depreciation value out of that. Let's say if the bridge costs, let's say $50 million, instead of $50 million go to the loss, we just put $5 million each year as a depreciation. And that was done at the time of the Martin, or adopted at the time of the Martin, I think in 95 or 96, so on. Do you think, since you said you were in the finance, how much of that was helpful in balancing the budget than the productivity of the?
I can't give you a direct answer, but my quick reaction is short-term gain for long-term pain.
Okay.
Because if you want to show that your revenue, we'll say that you purchase an item for $20 million. So if in cash accounting, you just write it off that year.
Yes, but if you put it in
which puts you further in a deficit.
Yes, that is.
But but
nevertheless, 20 million is gone.
Yes. Or if you say you take a straight line 10-year depreciation, that's $2 million a year. That means that you got $2 million bucks every year. Yeah. So as I say, short-term gain for long-term pain. What do you want? What do you want your books to look like? Do you want your books to look like they're really?
My question is how it affects either psychologically or practically in the economy when you change from one system to another, because 20 million is already gone.
Yeah.
Whether you put it in the book as a 2 million gone this year or 20 million gone, how does it?
How does it play through? That's a good question. I don't really have a good answer to that. I'm not quite sure how I would answer that. I've never actually seen a study as to whether a straight line depreciation is better than just simply a write-off. Yeah.
Now go back to your election.
My election.
Yes, change.
I'm very interested in that.
Change gear. So now our audience know that who you are, how extensive is your knowledge. How do you want to change? First of all, you mentioned that your riding has changed, the distribution.
Yeah.
But you are in the same riding. Just
2/3 of it is the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you really have any opponent after 18 years?
Well, the fellow for the Conservative, this is the third time he's taken a run at me.
Who is that?
His name's Conkle.
Oh, Mr. Conkle, yes.
Yeah,
maybe
Conkle.
I have him. Hopefully,
maybe you should.
Yeah.
My sense of it, this is we're 7 weeks out, is that the Conservative vote in my riding is collapsing.
And how do you come to the conclusion?
Only because when I knock on Conservative doors, there's sort of basically the two kinds. They're the ones who couldn't bring themselves to voting Liberal if hell froze over. and it's kind of like
They are just
they're
just
hardcore.
family, like a
they're
liberal
hardcore.
family.
Then there's the ones who have gone back and forth, and will tell you they've gone back and forth, and they'll say, well, I've even voted for you. Like, I hold my nose and voted for you.
Just because I don't want the other guy.
Yeah, well, no, but in the past,
Okay.
they've said they voted for me. They particularly liked Martin, because these are kind of, if you will, people who are fiscally sort of conservative people. And you can, and they, in the past couple of elections, have voted for Mr. Harper. And you can see that the Duffy thing has really bothered them. You can see that the fiscal thing is bothering them as well. The economy's not doing so well. And they're giving us a look again, where maybe even 6 months ago they wouldn't have given us a look. So, you know,
So
we're knocking on the doors. I'm kind of getting that.
Do you have
kind of-
internal poll too?
Yeah.
Then what does it say? I don't want you to reveal
Well,
that. but
I, you know,
is it favorable or
put
not?
if I'm not going to tell you if it's unfavorable, am I? Yeah. No, you know, you have your nose as a practicing politician, you have anecdotal evidence, etc.
Oh, yeah,
And then you have polling data.
Yeah.
And in this case, the polling data seems to be consistent with the anecdotal observations. The sec is so that's one thing that, and it's consistent with a vast majority in my riding just wants Mr. Harper gone, just gone. And then they're kicking the tires as to whether it's us or the NDP.
NDP.
And that's
Who is the NDP?
her name is Castleman. Castleman.
Yeah, Castleman.
She's new to politics.
I
Young person. I've only met her once or twice. Seems quite pleasant.
Have you ever had any debate locally yet,
No,
or no?
no.
But you're waiting till 28th of the deadline, and after that, maybe.
Well, yeah, the Greens still haven't nominated a candidate. And
Yeah, maybe
I'm kind of
just-
looking forward to the Rhinoceros Party. And,
Okay.
things of that
Now, talking about campaign and the process of campaign, before I go through the just actual mechanics of the campaign, you've been there for 18 years as an MP. Can you, in a nutshell, tell us what an MP does for the riding, especially when they are not in the government?
Yeah. An MP has 3 jobs: local, national, and international. So locally, we run a constituency office. I have one person entirely dedicated to immigration matters, whether it's
Because of the demography of
because of
the
democracy. She speaks 4 languages. She's a refugee herself, and she is wonderfully popular in the riding. The second area is tax and pensions. So we do a fair bit of tax and pensions, just helping people through the system. Then you've got events people expect you to go to, whether it's a commencement or whether it's a parade or whether it's Aunt Minnie's 50th anniversary or what. You're just expected to be there. The third aspect would be constituents who want to come in and tell you about what we talked about, which is what's going on in my country. So that's
That is
just
your
the local.
constituency office,
Yeah.
the local.
Yeah.
And do you really can help them?
In many instances, well, they keep giving me these gifts of some kind or another. You know, we've got all kinds of fattening things in the office, so they must like us for some reason or another.
No, I know, but from perspective of MP, when you go to Parliament, really, those local issues, really, can you do anything about
Oh,
it?
some of those, yeah, you can.
Because if you don't have the policy in place, how can you help it? And by the way, we are getting close to end.
Yeah, no, but you can actually help people with immigration issues, access the files for them, or go through a sense of that.
As an individual basis,
Yeah.
not as a whole
Yeah.
policy.
Now, as on the national level, in my case, I was involved in environment. Before that, I was involved in defense. Before that, I was involved in justice. Before that, I was involved in finance. So I've kind of hit a number of the big portfolios. And there, it's more amorphous. Like, how are you shaping legislative responses to particular issues, whether
Regarding
it's
the
a budget,
bills,
stuff,
introduced
stuff like
bills
that. It sometimes mines down to local, and so in our case, the Scarborough subway. It's a big deal for us. The people in Scarborough feel very aggrieved that everybody else seems to get mass transit and we don't. And it's, I think it's held Scarborough back. So, you know, when Mr. Trudeau announces a infrastructure and makes infrastructure announcements and talks about it in a green economy, we're all there.
Well,
we got bells on, man.
We will see.
Yeah.
We will see. And we have here we have 2 minutes. 3 or 0? Oh.
I see.
0. First of all, thank you for coming and accepting my invitation. And based on your background, I doubt you won't get elected.
Well, thank you for that endorsement.
But no, I don't endorse.
Yeah.
As I said to my previous guest, I love all of my guests get elected for a selfish reason.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Because then I can say I spoke to them and I have them. I had them in my show, and that was, first of all, a privilege. You were fountain of knowledge, and I am pretty sure whoever watched this program or the videotape in the future, they will enjoy listening to you.
Well, good.
You brought some internal scoop that was that is a little bit mystery for some people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And for unscripted questions, they were very penetrating questions.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I hope I didn't put you in an uncomfortable play.
I'll find out.
Situation.
I'll find out from Mr. Trudeau once this thing airs.
Thank you for being with us. Although we have another guest that shortly we will reset up the stage. But please remember, take part in your electoral process. I personally believe that is the only thing left of democracy as I know it. Be a volunteer, help a candidate, donate, distribute flyers, engage in talks, and more importantly, you yourself become a candidate. Good evening.